Have you ever been completely paralyzed by self-doubt? That sinking feeling that you're just not good enough, not smart enough, not ready for what's in front of you? It's a feeling we all know. It's that little voice that whispers all our worst fears in our most vulnerable moments. Now, imagine the one asking you to step up was God Himself. And what if, instead of jumping to it with perfect faith, your first instinct was to argue back? This is the incredible and deeply relatable story of the man who argued with God and, in a way, won. To really get this argument, you have to get the man. His name was Moses. But this wasn't the Moses we see in the movies, the confident leader, staff in hand, parting the Red Sea. No, this was Moses in exile. 40 years earlier, he'd been a prince of Egypt. He was raised in the luxury of Pharaoh's courts, described as mighty in words and deeds. But that all came crashing down when he tried to defend his fellow Hebrews. He killed an Egyptian and was forced to run for his life, trading a palace for the empty wilderness of Midian. For the next 4 decades, he lived a life of total obscurity. He wasn't a prince anymore. He was a shepherd, a husband, a father. He was a fugitive with a past, a man rejected by both the Egyptians who raised him and the Hebrews he tried to save. His confidence was shattered. He was 80 years old, living a quiet, forgotten life on the far side of the desert when he led his flock to Horeb, the mountain of God. And it was right there, in the shadow of the mountain, that his quiet life was about to be interrupted by a fire that wouldn't go out, and the broken shepherd would be called to become a nation's deliverer. It all started with a paradox. A bush that was on fire but wasn't burning up. It was so bizarre that Moses had to get a closer look. And from inside that fire, a voice called his name. Moses, Moses? Standing on holy ground, hiding his face in fear, Moses listened as God laid out his plan. He had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries, and he was going to rescue them. Then came the assignment that would change history. God was sending Moses to Pharaoh to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. This wasn't a polite request. It was a divine command. And Moses' response wasn't faith. It was pure, gut-wrenching doubt. What happened next wasn't a simple chat. It was a tense negotiation, an argument that came from a place of deep, deep insecurity. Moses fired back with 5 objections, and each one gives us a window into the heart of a man who felt completely and utterly unqualified. His first objection was a cry of inadequacy. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? This is the voice of a man who had lost everything. Who am I? I'm a forgotten shepherd, a wanted man. He looked at himself and saw no one capable of such a huge task. But God's answer didn't build Moses up. He didn't say, "You're strong, you're worthy, you can do this." He completely rejected the question. He just said, "I will be with you." The point wasn't who Moses was. The point was who was with him. God's presence was the only qualification that mattered. Unconvinced, Moses tried another angle, authority. Okay, so I go to the Israelites and say, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you." And they ask me, "What is his name?" Then what am I supposed to tell them? After 400 years of slavery, the Israelites' memory of their God was foggy. They were used to the Egyptian gods, gods with names and clear identities. Showing up without a name meant showing up with no authority. Moses needed credentials. God's answer is one of the most powerful and mysterious moments in the entire Bible. He said, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." This wasn't just a name. It was a statement, of eternal, self-sufficient reality. While other gods were defined by a job or a place, this God simply is. He's the uncreated, unchanging, ever-present God. He was telling Moses, "My authority is my own existence. I'm the God who is, who was, and who always will be." You'd think that would be enough, the promise of God's presence and the authority of his name. But Moses was still terrified. This led to his third objection, the fear of being rejected. What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, "The Lord did not appear to you"? This fear came from his own life. He tried to help his people before, and they turned on him. Why would this time be any different? He already had a track record of failure. This time, God didn't just offer words. He answered with power. He gave Moses 3 miraculous signs to perform. First, his shepherd's staff would turn into a snake, a symbol of power in Egypt, and then back into a staff. Second, his hand would become leprous and then instantly healed, a sign of God's power over disease. Third, he could turn water from the Nile into blood. These weren't just magic tricks. They were undeniable proof that God was with him and had the power to do what he said. And still, Moses resisted. He went even deeper, past the external problems, to his most personal weakness. This was his fourth, and maybe his most honest, objection. "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." Some traditions believe Moses had a stutter or some other speech impediment. He felt like he just didn't have the words, the charisma, the speaking skills to convince a nation or stand up to a king. He felt broken in the one area. This mission absolutely required him to be strong. God's response was a sharp reminder of who was in charge. Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Again, God didn't deny the weakness. He basically said, "Your weakness doesn't matter. I made the mouth. I can make it work." It's right here, in this moment of raw honesty, with Moses laying his biggest insecurity at God's feet, that we get to the real heart of this story. If you're finding this story about facing our weaknesses and fears head on as powerful as I do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps get these stories out to more people who might need to hear them. God had addressed every single one of his concerns. Moses had been given God's presence, God's name, God's power, and God's promise to help him speak. Logically, he was out of excuses. But in one last, desperate plea, he laid it all out there. "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please, send someone else." That was it. That was the bottom line. It wasn't just about feeling inadequate or being scared of rejection. He just really didn't want to go. The Bible says God's anger burned against Moses. But even in anger, God didn't walk away. He didn't give up on Moses. Instead, he offered one more concession, a final, practical solution. "What about your brother, Aaron? I know he can speak well. In fact, he is already on his way to meet you." God said Aaron would be Moses' spokesman, his mouthpiece. This is the moment Moses won the argument, not because he beat God or changed the ultimate mission, but because he wrestled so honestly that it resulted in God making a series of concessions. He argued from a real place of fear, and God met him at every single point. Moses didn't want to go alone, so God said, "I will be with you." He needed authority, so God gave him his name. He was afraid of rejection, so God gave him signs of power. He felt his speech was a liability, so God promised to help him. And when even that wasn't enough, God gave him his brother as a partner. The victory wasn't getting out of the mission, it was getting the exact support he needed to actually do it. The story of Moses at the burning bush is for anyone who has ever felt unqualified. God didn't choose the most confident, well-spoken person he could find. He chose a broken-down shepherd with a criminal record. It's a perfect example of a simple truth. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Moses' journey shows us that our weaknesses don't disqualify us from God's plan. In fact, they are often the exact things he uses to show his strength. When we know we don't have what it takes, we're forced to rely on his strength, not our own. Courage, as this story shows, isn't being fearless. It's being obedient even when you're terrified. Moses' fears were real, but he moved forward anyway. And his journey didn't stop there. In the wilderness, he faced constant challenges, but he kept going. He also learned to share the load, relying on people like his brother Aaron. As his life came to an end, this once reluctant leader poured himself into mentoring his successor, Joshua. He publicly commissioned him, telling him, "Be strong and courageous. The Lord himself goes before you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." The very same promise of God's presence that he got at the burning bush, he now passed on to the next generation. The man who started at a burning bush full of excuses became one of the most important leaders in all of history. He stood up to the most powerful king on earth, led millions of people through a parted sea, and received the law of God on a holy mountain. None of this happened because Moses was perfect or brave. It happened because he was willing to let God work through his weaknesses. He argued with God, but more importantly, he listened. He brought his deepest fears into the light, and in return, got the exact divine support he needed to overcome them. His story is a reminder for all of us that our feelings of inadequacy don't get the final say. When we feel overwhelmed, unqualified, or too broken to be used, we can remember the shepherd who argued with Godand was given everything he needed to change the world. If this story inspired you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of faith and transformation. Thanks for watching.